AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by thecollector.com. If you're into mind-blowing dives into ancient history, philosophy, killer art breakdowns, or even epic travel spots with a cultural twist, visit thecollector.com. Stories to teach, inform, and inspire. In 1945, as the ruins of the Third Reich still smoldered, an ambitious American psychiatrist named Douglas Kelley locked eyes across a prison table with Hermann Göring, Hitler's flamboyant deputy and the highest-ranking Nazi to face justice. What began as a clinical evaluation for the Nuremberg trials spiraled into a chilling psychological duel that would haunt Kelley for the rest of his life. Today, with the new Hollywood thriller Nuremberg bringing their fatal meeting to the screen, we sit down with the award-winning author Jack L. High, whose book the movie is based on, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, to discuss the book's inspiration and separate stark historical truth from some cinematic drama.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peter. I'm very glad to be here.
So before we get going and start talking about this movie and your book, what was it that inspired you to become a historian in the first place?
Well, it's interesting. I don't call myself a historian. I call myself a history writer, and that's because I am not academically trained in history, and my interests are really not the same as what I see historians doing who are engaged in the academic or scholarly study of history. What I like to do is to tell factual stories from history. And I rely not on any particular academic underpinning for that, but on my journalism background. So I, for years, wrote magazine articles in regional and national magazines. And I'm using those same skills as an interviewer and researcher when I write my history books now. And I began writing about history because I'm interested in it. And I saw, this is way back in the 1980s, when I began writing magazine articles, I saw few people who were doing it, who were writing history articles well for general readers as opposed to scholarly or academic readers. And so I got into it back then and haven't stopped, I guess.
What was the inspiration for your book, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist?
The Nazi and the Psychiatrist really began with my previous book, which was called The Lobotomist. And The Lobotomist was about another psychiatrist, Walter Freeman, who developed and advocated for this procedure, lobotomy, to treat serious psychiatric disorders. But as I learned from going through Dr. Freeman's notes and his vast archive that he left behind, in 1938, he was very struck by meeting this other psychiatrist named Douglas Kelley at a conference of the American Psychiatric Association. And what struck Dr. Freeman about Dr. Kelley was that Kelley was at this conference not to present a paper or to give a talk, but to give a magic show. Dr. Kelley, his whole life, was interested in stage magic. He worked as a magician at earlier stages of his life. And so when I read that lodged in my brain, and I went back to it a little later and learned that Dr. Kelley had worked with the German defendants in the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. And I just wanted to know more about him. And I set off in pursuit of Dr. Kelley's papers, which were not easy to find.
Kelley concluded that the Nazi leaders were not clinically insane, but more psychologically quite ordinary. Did that finding shake your own assumptions about the nature of evil going into this project? And perhaps was there anything else that surprised you while doing this research?
It didn't really shake my personal ideas about evil because I had already gained some experience writing about somebody who many people consider to be evil, and that's the Dr. Freeman, the lobotomy doctor who I mentioned earlier. And I knew that he was no monster, not that he was admirable in any way, but that he was motivated by many of the same things that motivate all of us in our daily endeavors. He was a person whose work went wrong. And so to learn through Dr. Kelley's studies that he didn't regard the German defendants and war criminals as evil monsters didn't surprise me. What did surprise me, though, from all that is the consequence that this belief had on Dr. Kelley's career. Dr. Kelley, studied these 22 German defendants in the trial, studied them extensively, interviewed them, spent hundreds of hours with them over many months, and came to the conclusion that not only were they not insane or monsters, but that people like them are all around us. And these are people without conscience, people who are opportunists and willing to run over half of us to gain control of the other half. And so Dr. Kelley, when he returned to the States after his time at Nuremberg, spent a lot of effort giving lectures. He wrote a book too, postulating this notion of the Nazis, and it was not well received at all. People wanted to think of them as madmen or as monsters.
For listeners who finish reading your book, what's the one question or idea you most hope lingers with them about the fragility of human mind when power, ideology, and war collide, or any other message that might linger with them after reading your book?
I guess I would like readers to, I don't want, my book isn't an argument. Yeah. So I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. But what I would like readers to think about are Dr. Kelley's ideas on the nature of evil and to apply them to what we are living right now. When I wrote The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, it was published in 2013, people like extremists and Nazis and Nazi-like followers were then on the outskirts of our political scene. Not so anymore. They're in the center of it all. And I think Dr. Kelley's story and the examples of what he learned at Nuremberg can teach us some lessons about how to deal with the political predicament that we are in now. Dr. Kelley actually laid out a plan in his book, 22 Cells in Nuremberg, for safeguarding our democracy. And we'd be wise to pay attention to that now. It includes things like, in the U.S., enabling legislation that makes it easier, not more difficult, for qualified voters to cast their ballot. In many states, we've seen the opposite happening. It is more difficult than it used to be for qualified voters to cast their ballots. He also believed that in our educational system, we need to spend a lot of time helping students attain critical thinking. That means reasonably judging and forming opinions based on the evidence, based on facts, and based on experience, not based on emotional responses to circumstances. And then finally, one of Dr. Kelley's suggestions, I'm sure, would not fly now, and I don't think I believe in it either. And he believed that all candidates for political office should receive a mandatory psychiatric examination.
It's interesting because the current events definitely become a lot more nerve-wracking for someone that studies history, seeing the parallels of the past and what the world is going through today.
Yes, and there's a lot of bemoaning and wailing going on now about how young students now know so little about World War II. They know so little about the Holocaust and about the Nuremberg trials. But you have to remember that these trials now are at an 80-year remove from the lives of these students. And I'm 66, so I was born 13 years after the end of World War II. That's not a very long time. And so that's one reason why I feel like I and others of my age have had close proximity to those events and know something about it. But for a student, say, who was born in 2005, 13 years before that is only 1992. It's a long stretch between there and World War II. So I am glad that many people are learning about World War II and the trial and the Holocaust, etc., from seeing the movie Nuremberg and from reading my book, The Nazi and the Psychiatrist. But I certainly don't blame them for not knowing.
Amazon 5-Star Theater presents Real Customer Reviews, performed by a real serious improv podcaster. Tonight's review, hot sauce. Eating this hot sauce is a fever dream. It's like acid turning my saliva into lava. I chug almond milk to cut down the heat and assume it's over. But at 1 a.m., the sauce strikes again. It woke me from a deep slumber and sent me to the toilet. I took a runner's pose in the bathroom. I thanked my landlords for the tile floor. The pain rustled my gut like an M16 bullet, spiraling about until finally I woke up 30 minutes later. Then, praying for the end, settled in calm. But no, it rips the sheets off your bed, hurls you around in a fury once more, double flushes the toilet, punches a hole in the wall, then leaves. 5 stars, Aaron B. Thank you for listening to Amazon 5-Star Theater. Looking for unforgettable gifts this holiday season, like a hot sauce to literally burn your thoughtfulness into the memories of your friends? Find your perfect gift this holiday on Amazon.
Moving on to the movie, I would argue that having your book adapted to screen is every historian's dream. How did you find out about this? What was your initial reaction? And what were some of your initial worries about this project?
Every year, and this is something I keep reminding myself, there are scores, maybe hundreds of books, fiction and nonfiction, that would make wonderful movies, new books that are published that would make wonderful movies. But it happens to only a very small number of them. In my case, it happened because that earlier book that I mentioned, The Lobotomist, had been optioned by a production company. And so when I started writing about Dr. Kelley later on, and I began my writing on him by publishing an article, also called The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, in a magazine called Scientific American Mind. And when that article was published, I sent a link for the article to a man named James Vanderbilt, and he was with that production company that had optioned The Lobotomist. And I thought James and others in the production company would be interested in it. And it turned out James was very much interested in it. And he has since told me that he had never read anything before that so quickly told him this needs to be a movie. And he was in a position to make it into a movie, although it was a very long and hard road. This happened in 2011. So over the years, James sent me drafts of the screenplay he was writing. I think I saw 4 drafts over the years, and I would read them and comment. I didn't see my job as a history writer to be the fact checker for James's screenplay, because I believe that good movies are very different from good books and tell stories in different ways. And eventually, James's that production company broke apart, and so the book and the option were adrift. But James continued his interest in it, and several years later attached himself to another production company called Bluestone, and they're the ones who led the way with what became the movie Nuremberg. So I think it was at the end of 2023 that I learned that Bluestone was really wanting to go ahead, and that's when all of this started. So there were many years of nothing happening, and then suddenly, quickly, something was happening.
I'm going to ask kind of like a double question, because once you started finding out about the people that are going to play these characters, I mean, that has to be exciting. These are Oscar winners, and I'm kind of curious how you reacted to those announcements. But also, hypothetically speaking, if these 2 main leads that wound up playing these characters were not available, did you have anybody else in mind, or would you have anybody else in mind that you think would have played or could do a good job playing these characters?
I'm not in the movie business, and so I don't think in those terms. There was one person who I thought early on would make a great Hermann Göring, and that was Philip Seymour Hoffman. But he's no longer available, and I was very pleased with the way that James Vanderbilt and his associates cast this movie, and the caliber of the actors who became attached to it. So, as a guy who spends most of his day sitting in front of a computer doing work that looks like drudgery to most other people, looking in notes and researching and typing and making end notes, I don't know how people do things in the movie business, and I've come to trust people like James Vanderbilt who do what they do well, and I trust their decisions.
How did the script change and or remain faithful to your research in The Nazi and the Psychiatrist? Was there any moment in there where you thought maybe too much factual information was being sacrificed for conveying the story's emotion?
No, I never felt that. And it's because the movie is really just taking a slice of my book. The movie covers about a year of time. My book covers 45 years of time. So I knew there would be a lot left out, and that certain aspects would need to be changed to make it a coherent and moving and entertaining film. So there are differences. One of my great resources in writing the book was Dr. Kelley's son, Doug Jr., and he was the one who provided me with all of his father's papers and also gave me his perspective on his father's life and career. And when the movie was coming out, I had to warn Doug that there were some things that he might find jarring in the movie. For instance, that in the movie, his mother doesn't exist. Dr. Kelley was a married man during his entire time in Nuremberg. There's no mention or reference to that in the film, and nor should there be, because of the story that the movie is telling. She would have nothing to do with that, and a few other things like that. But one reason why I do feel good about recommending Nuremberg to people I know is that it is I use the term essentially factual, which means mostly factual, not 100% factual. And it's factual enough to convey the messages that I think are important. So the important messages are the same in my book and in the movie. And that's really satisfying to me.
When I did the review of the movie, and I have read your book years ago, I had to kind of remind myself what, all the specifics were about, but I tried to explain the fact that a movie's goal is to convey its information much differently than a book. And not to say anyone is worse or better than the other, they're just different. But I would say to someone that goes into this movie and says, well, there are some historical, perhaps inaccuracies, or maybe this is not told entirely how it was, I would just say to that person, well, then go read the book. And I think that's the power of movies. At the most, or at the least, rather, they would inspire someone to go and find out more about the topic. So that way the movie would be successful if someone goes to see it and then comes out of it and says to themselves, you know what, I want to know more. And then they go and pick up your book to have more of that factual information that, and also the rest of the story. So if they're not satisfied with just a few lines at the end, and then this is what happened after, if you want to know what happened, then go and pick up the book.
I agree with that completely. No one should expect to get a complete, fully accurate history lesson from any movie, even if it is based on fact or based on true events. The time to get that is maybe after you've seen the film and are intrigued by the story. Yes, then go pick up the book. Or if you don't want there to be any dramatic liberties taken with the story, don't see the movie to begin with. Start with the book. But I do know of authors who are sticklers for the who want the film or TV series, whatever it is, to closely align with their book or their story. And I can understand that, especially for fiction writers who have created characters, created worlds, and don't want to see anything different entering the picture. But for nonfiction writers, we are also in the business of translating reality, translating fact, what happened, into a format that our audience can understand. It's the exact same thing that filmmakers do. And I am thrilled that someone of James Vanderbilt's abilities and caliber felt inspired by my book to take the story and run in the direction that he thought would move people.
So my last official question. As a writer, you're also a reader. What are you currently reading? And or can you think of a book that has really stayed with you that you have read at some point in your life?
Well, one book that I read some years ago that I think about a lot still is called Old Friends by Tracy Kidder. Tracy Kidder is a writer. He's written many nonfiction books. And this book is about two old men. It's factual, living in an old age home. You might call it a nursing home. And they're roommates. And it follows them together as roommates for about a year. And when changes have occurred, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but by the end of the book, changes have occurred. And it's on the surface a small story, just two guys living in the same room and talking to each other. But it is a universal story. It's much bigger than two guys in a room. And that's what I think great books, whether they are fiction or nonfiction books, can do. So that book has stayed with me for a long time. And when I used to teach writing classes, I'd often ask students to read that book, Old Friends. The book I'm reading right now is called Bone Valley. It's by Gilbert King. and it's a historical true crime book. Gilbert King is an extremely skilled writer of nonfiction, and he knows what he's doing, and it just is very nice for me to see a master at work. I also read a lot of fiction. Probably about half of what I read is fiction, and that's because fiction writers can teach me all kinds of things about storytelling and how to enter characters' experiences and things that are important for nonfiction writers to know as well.
So, Jack, what are you working on now?
I've just finished another book, which I hope will be coming out next year. And it's called The Case of the Autographed Corpse. It is a historical true crime, although the emphasis is not on the crime, but on a miscarriage of justice. So it's about an Apache medicine man living on a couple of Apache reservations in the eastern part of Arizona in the 1920s, 1930s. And he is charged with murdering his wife. And he goes to prison for it, life sentence. But he didn't do it. And there's ample evidence that he didn't do it. So he serves many years in prison, and in desperation, he writes for help to a man named Earl Stanley Gardner, who was the best-selling author in the world in the early 1950s, because he wrote all the Perry Mason mystery books, which were huge sellers. Earl Stanley Gardner was also a trial attorney before he became an author. He had an organization called the Court of Last Resort to help people who had been wrongfully convicted of serious crimes. And they decided to reinvestigate the Apache medicine man's case, did so, and the book is about the outcome of their investigation.
This sounds awesome. Actually, it sounds like you have another movie on your hands.
Who knows? You know, the movie part depends on so many factors, like financing and all of that, which is completely out of my control, that I try not to think of it too much.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This was truly an honor.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. Thanks so much, Peter.